Hi, and welcome to Cooking the Books with Heather. Today we're going to be working out of the Deep Run Roots cookbook, which a lot of our recipes have come from lately, and we're going to be making the roasted and fresh tomato pie. Okay, while my pie crust is coming up to temperature, since I have some time now, I'm going to go ahead and slice up the onions. We are supposed to julienne these with the grain. So let me get these peeled. My absolute least favorite thing to deal with in the kitchen is onion and garlic skin. It sticks to everything. It's the liquid in the onions and the garlic makes it stick to your hands. It's just impossible. It's all over the floor. Ugh, hate it so much. Anyway, so we're supposed to julienne these, cut them really, really thinly with the grain, which means this way. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, I've got those all done, but since I have this little piece left, I'm gonna have to go through all of these and just sort of make sure. I just don't like having that little piece of looks like onion skin from the middle in my dish, so I'm just going to try to pick that out. So I finished picking through all the onions and I cleaned up a little bit, getting ready to chop up my tomatoes, but I just want to show you these are the sliced up onions, and what we're going to do now is caramelize them. Not going to really show you that because we have a lot of other things we're supposed to be doing in the meantime and they take a long time. But what I'm going to do is put a little bit of butter in the pan as per the recipe, and then cook the tomatoes on medium-low for about 40 minutes. And we're going for caramelized, and that takes way longer than most people tell you on these cooking shows or in recipes, because I think it's just a little too, it would be too intimidating if most people tell you it takes 40 minutes, but it really takes like at least 40 minutes. So especially if you do it low and slow. So that's what we're doing now. For this recipe, we need to cut our tomatoes into a 1/2 inch dice. Now this is how I'm gonna do it. She does not call for them being peeled, so I'm not gonna do that. I am gonna cut them in half and cut out the core, the top, where it's sort of thick and a little yucky and not really ripe. We are also doing different things. So half of them are going to be roasted in the oven and half of them are going to be fresh and like salted and drained a bit. I'm going to be a little picky about which half of my my tomatoes are roasted and which half are not, because I sent my assistant to get the tomatoes and not all of them are perfectly ripe. So I'm going to make sure that the ones that are not really all that ripe right now are going to be roasted to sort of concentrate their flavor. So that's why I have 2 bowls here. So the ones that are a little less ripe, I'm going to put in the roasting group, and the ones that are a little bit more ripe, I'm going to leave in the fresh group. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and slice these up into 1/2 inch dice. And a good tip is if you have a problem with your knife getting through the skin, which often happens, if you have a serrated knife, those work better. But I might switch, we'll see. I'm done chopping my tomatoes. You can see these ones are much redder. These are the ones that I'm going to salt and drain and leave fresh. These ones are a little more orange, a little less ripe, so we're going to go ahead and roast these. I've just taken the pie crust out of the oven and there's really not a lot to see. The edges do look a little brown, hard to show you guys, but we'll see it when we're ready to put everything together. Now I'm getting my tomatoes ready to roast. My onions are done. They're looking kind of dry, but they're definitely caramelized and not burned. So with everything, all the fluid, liquid, and everything else in the tomatoes, it'll be fine. So I'm gonna add some salt to these tomatoes. These are the tomatoes that that were not quite so ripe. I've got some thyme, fresh picked off the stem thyme, and then we add some olive oil. All right. I'm just gonna toss this together, and then you spread it out on this sheet pan as much as you can. And I've turned the oven down to 375, and we're gonna roast these for 20 to 30 minutes. So I'm gonna spread these out. And go ahead, these have been sitting for a while, so they've let loose a bit of juice. This isn't fully covered with parchment, but it's just to help me clean it up later. It won't be quite so bad. So there we go, mostly sort of spread out as much as I can. I'm gonna get, I missed a couple. I'm gonna get this in the oven, and then we're gonna check those at 20 minutes. So we've got the rest of our tomatoes, the ones that were more ripe, and we're going to add some sugar, just a little bit of sugar, and the same amount of salt. And then I'm gonna toss this together, and we're gonna let these drain in my sink in a colander for at least 30 minutes. We're just gonna let those drain and basically until we're ready for everything. These have already given off a lot of liquid. You could save that if you want and use it for vinaigrettes and things like that. I'm probably not going to. I'm just gonna let it drain into the sink, but you could put a bowl under the colander and save it. I'm gonna keep this bowl because we're gonna have to, and I'm not gonna bother really washing it. We're gonna have to mix everything up together, the roasted tomatoes, the fresh tomatoes, and a few other things before we put it into the pie crust. So I'm just gonna keep this over here. I'm gonna clean up, and then you guys don't need to watch me grate some cheese. I'm gonna grate some cheese and measure out some other ingredients that we're gonna need once everything is done to put it all together. And we'll be back once we're ready to put everything together, okay? Tomatoes are done roasting. I'm assuming my tomatoes are done draining. My pie, I've taken the beans out of those. My onions are caramelized, and I've already got them in my bowl here. And we are ready finally to put everything together. So I'm gonna be sort of grabbing things from around the kitchen because they didn't all fit here. But so I've got my onions in the bowl already. I'm gonna get my roasted tomatoes have been sitting for a little bit since I took them out of the oven, just because life happens. Honestly, I roasted those for about 40 minutes at least, probably. And I did turn on the convection for a little while because they were still very wet at the end of 20 minutes. So not the whole time, but for a little while I did convection. I think those are good. So we've got our roasted tomatoes, and now I'm gonna get my fresh tomatoes. Shook out as much of the liquid as I could, but then it was still kind of drippy, so I'm gonna put these in here. And then we have some pepper. I think it's 10 turns of the pepper mill. And then we have 1/3 of a cup of packed basil leaves. She does not say to do anything with these, so I did not tear them up, did not do anything but take them off of the stems. Some are tiny, some are big. We'll see how it works out. And then, great. Just dry that off a little bit, got a little tomato juice on it. It's the remaining salt and the remaining sugar, so I had to do some math. So we've got some salt and some sugar. I think that is it. That is it. So we just stir this together, get it all mixed up. And then we spoon it into our pie crust. All right. So I'm going to put it all in here, try to make sure the basil gets distributed. And sort of push it into the edges. Now, okay, I'm dripping. All right. So that is it for the filling part, but there's a topping we have to do now. For our topping, we have equal amounts of Parmesan, Fontina and Parmesan grated. I did measure these and they are relatively close to, they're pretty close. I tend to overdo it on cheese, so I'm trying not to do that this time. And we've got some mayo. And we're gonna just mix this up together. And it goes right on top of the pie. And I did not make my own mayo for this. It was not requested that I make my own mayo for this, so I am using Duke's, which is what my family generally uses for most things. So we have our pie. And we're going to try to spread this. I probably should have done dollops around the edges, but that's all right. I'm going to try to spread this around the top. It may not cover the whole thing. Hers had a picture, the picture had it not quite to the edges, so I'm not concerned that this is not covering the whole pie. I don't think I did anything wrong there. So now this goes back into the oven for 30 minutes. Same temperature that we roasted the tomatoes at. So 30 minutes, we'll be back. On this episode of Cooking the Books with Heather, we made the roasted and fresh tomato pie from the Deep Run Roots cookbook by Vivian Howard. And I have to say, this one seemed like it took forever. Because first we had to start last night and do the crust, get the crust together, and then there are a lot of extra steps, so like time-consuming steps, like bringing the crust up to room temperature and roasting the tomatoes and blind baking the crust and draining the other half of the tomatoes. And I felt like I was cooking this recipe all day. And really, it was probably from the time we started today until it was out of the oven was probably at least 4 hours. Now, we weren't trying to cram things in as quickly as possible and all that, but it just took some time. Making a crust is not my favorite thing. The crust did turn out fine. It was not as tough as I expected. It might be, given that I had to work in some extra water in it this morning. But it was, you know, it's always, making a pie crust always feels like a lot of work to me. And I feel a little bit lied to, because this crust in this picture, this is a store-bought crust. I don't know anybody who makes a homemade crust and gets the edge on it like this. I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain that the picture, at least, is a store-bought crust. So that would be a way to make it a little bit simpler. It did require, the crust called for a stand mixer. But, you know, you can get away with making a pie crust another way if you don't have one of those, or you can use a store-bought crust. They're fine, in my opinion. But the results, the pie was really, really good. It turned out pretty much exactly like the picture. It tasted delicious. The salt content was good, even with our tomatoes that were less than ripe, less than perfect tomatoes. Still, it was delicious. I very much enjoyed it. My husband loved it. The kids didn't love it, but didn't hate it. They ate it. They don't like any tomato pie though, so it's fine. Even my son, who loves tomatoes, didn't want to eat all of it. I think it was probably the basil. For some reason, they don't like that. But I would make it again. I might cut a few corners though. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Cooking the Books with Heather. If you did, please hit the like and subscribe buttons if you haven't, and come back next week and we'll have another recipe for you.